Hello again, this is Dr. Michael Bogart welcoming you back to our video series Exploring World Religions. In this 12th series of videos, we're looking at Judaism. In clip 1, we looked at what Judaism is, its essence. In this clip, we will give a brief overview of how the religion of ancient Israel developed into the Rabbinic Judaism of today. Okay, the big picture view is that there have been 3 phases of Jewish development. First is what I call Biblical Judaism. This phase lasted from around 1300 BC to around 600 BC, roughly from Moses to the Babylonian exile. It's the religion of ancient Israel as prescribed by God through Moses and practiced by the Israelites in the Bible. It focused on the ordinances of the Torah and the rites performed at the Israelite temple. These rites were overseen by the Levites and priests of Israel. Biblical Judaism reached its height under the kingdom of David and Solomon around 1000 BC in Jerusalem. This was the only time when Israel was at least mostly independent and people were at least theoretically all on the same page religiously. At the end of this period, God sent prophets to rebuke Israel for their faithlessness to the true worship and observance of the Torah. So let me explain Israel's system of worship. Israel was founded on the 12 sons of Jacob, Abraham's grandson. They are the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. One of these tribes was Levi. This tribe was set apart for religious service, sort of like the clergy of Israel. When Israel came out of Egyptian slavery and eventually settled in the land that God promised them, all of the tribes received portions of land except for the Levites. They were settled among the other tribes to teach the Torah and to oversee religious life. They also served at Israel's central place of worship, first the movable tent called the tabernacle, and later at the permanent temple built by King Solomon in Jerusalem. So at the temple, the focus was the worship of God through offerings and sacrifices. Now, let's say that you had broken one of the laws of the Torah and needed to make a sacrifice to atone for your sin. Here's what you would do. You would bring to the temple the appropriate animal for sacrifice, a sheep or a bull or something like that. You would appear before one of the Levites on duty who would examine your sacrifice to make sure that the animal was not defective. Then he would call for one of the priests, called a Kohen. The priest would place your hands on the animal's head to transfer your transgression, your sin. Then the animal would be quickly and humanely slaughtered. Its blood would then be sprinkled on the huge altar in the temple courtyard, and its meat would be butchered, part of which was given to the Levites, that's how they survived, and part was given back to you for a meal to eat in celebration for the atonement of your sin. Offerings could also be made as thanksgiving offerings to the Lord from your crop of grain or other produce as a thanksgiving for the blessings of life. This biblical Judaism eventually degenerated into something very far from what God had given through Moses. So, as the prophets warned, God allowed judgment to come on his disobedient people. Israel was taken into exile in 2 waves. First, the northern tribes in 722 BC. They were captured and deported by the Assyrians and, for all practical purposes, have been lost to history. Then, beginning in 606 BC, the remaining tribes, under the leadership of the tribe of Judah, were exiled by the Babylonians. That is when the surviving Israelites simply became known as Yehuda, or Jews, from the leading tribe of Judah. So now we move into Transitional Judaism, which lasted from around 600 BC to just before 100 AD. That would be from the exile until a generation or 2 after the time of Jesus. A main factor in Judaism from this time onward is the diaspora. Now, the diaspora is simply a term that means Jews scattered out of their homeland and living as a minority in other nations. And by the way, that situation still holds true for many Jews today. Eventually, some Jews from exile were allowed to return to their land by King Cyrus of Persia in the late 500s BC. They rebuilt their temple and then they resumed their worship. So they had a second temple after the first one was destroyed. But for many Jews, worship at the temple wasn't an option because of distance. So they met together as they could to study and live the Torah. When Levites weren't available, they turned to any respected and learned man to lead them. These leaders became known as rabbis or teachers. The places where they met are called synagogues. Also, since most Jews no longer spoke their native language, Hebrew, at home, it had to be learned as a religious language so that the scriptures could be understood and followed. But again, many Jews couldn't or didn't learn Hebrew, so eventually, around 200 BC, a Greek language translation of the Jewish scriptures was made to give Greek-speaking Jews access to their holy book. This translation is called the Septuagint. So after that, Jews lived under many overlords during this period: Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and others. And this is the context in which we encounter Jesus and the disciples in the New Testament. The early church split from Judaism at the end of this transitional period over Jesus' claim that he was the Messiah of Israel. Finally, we come to Rabbinic Judaism, which has been the norm from about 100 AD to the present. In 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the Israelite temple from the time of Jesus, so that would be the Second Temple. So now Jews had no way of making sacrifices because the only place they could do so was in Jerusalem at that temple site. And this is Judaism without a temple, without an active priesthood, and it's based upon now the interpretations of the Talmud as taught by the rabbis. As I said, Christianity separated from the main body of Judaism early on and grew into a separate, mainly non-Jewish body from that point onward. The focus of Judaism from that time on was exclusively now on synagogues and rabbis. Since large populations of Jews lived in Arab countries and in different parts of Europe, there have developed over time several sub-ethnic groups among Jews. Jews developed their own culture, for instance, in Spain and Portugal. These Jews are called Sephardi Jews. Jews did the same in Germany and Eastern Europe. They're known as Ashkenazi Jews. Jews were widely scattered over North Africa and the Middle East. These are known as Mizrahi Jews. Of course, Christianity began in the 1st century, but was persecuted until Constantine legalized it in the 4th century. It eventually became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, and its close relations with government and culture created something called Christendom in the Middle Ages. So between the influence of Christendom and the rise of Islam in the 600s and 700s AD, Judaism was forced to develop and adapt even further. Okay, so much for clip 2 in this 12th video within the Exploring World Religions series. I hope this has given you a big picture view of how Judaism developed over many centuries. In clip 3, we will continue some of the main beliefs and practices of Jews today. Till then, this is Dr. Michael Bogart. We'll see you next time.